Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to have a brief discussion on movement system impairment based classification. This is one of the classification, especially they're using in musculoskeletal practice. I'm not sure how popular it is among clinicians, but maybe at least a section of physiotherapists who are aware of it. And to those who are not aware, this is basically a classification system for managing patients with musculoskeletal conditions, something like McKenzie's system. Uh, Basically, what this system or this particular classification system is based on is that before that, this is developed by Shirley Shorman, one of the well-known physiotherapists, I guess, right? Basically, what she proposed is she proposed a new system called movement system. It has got a lot of endorsement, especially the APTAs endorsed such a classification or existence of such a system. We'll get into it later, what exactly it means. So they proposed a system called a system of physiological organ system that interact to produce movement of the body and its parts. This is what they proposed as a movement system. And this classification system is based on, again, a model called kinesio-pathologic model. In simple words, basically the mechanical pathomechanics and how it leads to problem. That's the idea. So the basic premise is that a repetitive movement and sustained alignments, again in simple words, abnormal posture, can induce pathology, and this whole system of classification is based upon classifying the patients according to the abnormal pathology or the movement, both the posture and the movement, the abnormalities, mechanical abnormalities. They classify them, and then a set of exercises is directed towards changing the abnormal movement pattern, what they call a kinesiopathology, and also changing the posture. And their assumption is that they have several classification system, and exercise targeting specifically will produce change. And they proposed it as a classification system, which is supposed to be better than what is commonly used, right? So in this discussion, we're going to have a critical view of what they proposed and what is the evidence for their claims. And to discuss, we have with us Mr. Hariom, and we will start our discussion first by asking him what are his thoughts on a system called movement system.
Right. And in the model you have shown, the first thing you will see which is missing is context. Without context, there is no movement at all. We have to interact in an environment. If you are not interacting in an environment, why are we going to move? We are not. Where is the need for it? All these things are not only philosophical; these are all scientific questions. And, they have been proved again and again that all our movements are based on goals and based on an interaction with the environment. And the first thing you see or you don't see is that part of the model is missing. Probably because it was developed in the 80s, that's why it's missing.
Okay, so the understanding of the movement itself is, the factors that determine movements, to be more specific, motor behaviors, because that's the difference. If they see the movements in terms of anatomical or physiological movement, flexion extension, if you see that, things can, and that's like you're wearing a completely different spectacle and looking at movement in a simplistic or the lowest level, right? But what movement that we produce is determined by the context and the human body's interaction with that context. Right. So without that context, understanding of whatever that they propose is also difficult to actually imagine how this puts how this
Yeah.
can actually be implemented. But the next question which I want to ask is, okay, it's in I believe it's in late 1980s they proposed. What's new about this uh, this idea compared to what it was before?
Uh, I'm not sure, but I think they incorporated a lot of ideas from pseudoscience proponents like Janda or whatever they have to pronounce the name, like the upper cost syndrome and the
Yeah,
lower
yeah,
cost syndrome. So they think that one muscle is shorter, another muscle is longer, one muscle is weaker, the other muscle is stronger. These kind of ideas, I think they combine all these things probably into physiotherapy with again a pseudo nomenclature of alignment and things like that.
When I first read this explanation, the first question that came to me, this is what we always assume, that there is sustained posture and repetitive movement. In musculoskeletal, that seems to be a common explanation for any injury, whether in sports or work or anything, right? So how is it? How did they push that as something different?
I really don't know. Probably white people syndrome with APTA syndrome myself. And what I mean by that is uh, if you are at the top of the world or at the top of the science, you propose that everybody follows it. That kind of thing is there. And also uh, they want to show they are the leading lights in the world, I suppose. That's a cynical view, but that sometimes when I see it now, it looks something like that. One of the reasons I think this model is a problem, I just want to add two more points before getting it. One is if they say repetitive means they just don't quantify how many repetitions does it make. That is the cutoff for repetition. If I do 10, will I get a repetitive injury? If I do 100, do I get a repetitive injury? And if I do 100, if I am, say, for example, a day labor who works in building, if I can't do 100, I cannot live. So it doesn't define any context, but just says repetitive without any sort of definitions, any sort of context. This is one of the hallmarks of nonsensical science.
The irony is that the treatment is also repetitive, isn't it? Now, if you are giving exercises, the fundamental principle of exercise, you got to do it. And even if you are just trying to build up your muscle or you're trying to, work in a sports or anything, you got to do it repetitively. That's the whole point.
Correct. And that's why I say it's nonsensical science. It's not even pseudoscience. The next thing is you will see that if they say that this is a normal muscle power and this is abnormal muscle power, this is normal length and this is abnormal length, in relation to what again? What is 2 standard deviation or 3 standard deviation or 1 standard deviation? How did you measure this length as abnormal, right? Again, they don't define anything. They just throw it. And the sad part is because physiotherapy is not taught as a science in any time in my lifetime, right? It's never a science. So we just follow what somebody tells us. So this is getting murkier and murkier because there is no sense of even the basic science we learn in physics in 6th standard or 7th standard. What is measurement? How did you measure? What is it? They tell you that the science progressed because they can define a point. If you can define a point, then only you can measure something, right? Now here they have not defined a point at all, and they have just thrown more and more bricks at it. It's just sad.
And talking about measurement, this classification is based upon visual observation. By physiotherapists, they'll visually observe the movement and they will classify. Right now, to the viewers who are just looking at listening to it and start thinking these people have no work, they just criticize everything. What we are saying is also the evidence also points towards that. I'm just going to show one. There are many, obviously for time constraint. Okay, so for us to say, first of all, for the classification system work, therapists must be able to classify them. And the bigger problem, as I pointed out, that classification based upon visual observation. Then two people can observe and they can come to a different conclusion. And they've tested it in a reliability, obviously. I have had two physiotherapists who are evaluating 24 patients. And let's see what did they found out. Let me show the study. Okay, right. Yeah, I guess you can see. Yeah, you can see the screen, right? Yeah. So this is the reliability of the movement-based syndrome in a chronic low back pain, right? It's just published in JOSPT, right? So let me just get the abstract part of it. So what did they want to find out? They want to find out whether two therapists agree on a classification system. Let's look at the results. What did they find, right? The kappa coefficient, which is corrects for chance agreement, is 0.61. And for those who are not familiar with what this means, is that if kappa coefficient comes 0.5, it just means it's equal to a coin toss. Now you can say either it's just 50% chances there. You don't even have to be a physiotherapist. You don't have to know anything. You can just toss a coin. 50% of the time you will be right. And 0.6 means that is 10% more you are likely to be true, right? So that's what you have to ask, 10%, right? So ideally, for a classification system such as this, meaning that based upon this classification system, you're going to change treatment. Now, this classification 1 means you're going to give another treatment and so on and so forth, right? For this, we will expect something more than 0.8, right? Because the consequences of wrong classification is relatively worse or bigger, right? It doesn't end here. This is what they found in that 24 sample. Of course, if you're a PG student, you will wonder that when I'm doing study, they're not allowing me to have 24 and so on. Their sample size. How come these people do 24 patients and do it? Yeah, that's the irony.
White people syndrome.
Yeah, and they publish in whatever journal, right? So let me point out here the confidence interval of that kappa. The lower limit is 0.33, which they failed to discuss in any part of the results. 0.33 means that the agreement is less than a coin toss. That's the worst you can get. And it goes from 0.3 through 0.8. Again, it is pointing towards a very, very small sample size. Right. So without getting into the critical appraisal of it. So I was just showing this to make the point that what Mr. Hariom is making, what we're discussing is supported by the research done by somebody who wanted to use this, right? But you can go and look at the conclusion. They didn't really conclude as we are suggesting. They just said that everything's all right, you can use it and so on. Again, that's where what we call spin, where the author's intention is, interfering with the actual results.
This is the point where I say this is nonsensical science. Without defining anything, they have got into a reliability study. This is basically why physiotherapy is still a poor science, because you start with nonsense and you will get nonsense. I didn't see that study, but I can predict the outcome. You can do it hundreds of times. I can predict the same outcome because you have not defined anything. anything means anything. How will you get an answer for this, right? Uh, this is the biggest problem when you have just observational science rather than empirical science.
Right. So many of us or our viewers might think that uh, if we are criticizing all newer things, then how are we going to develop? Or I'll put that question in a different way. Okay, let us assume that someone really gets an idea, what they consider as a new idea, the new way of, and they've tested in their patient, they found it, no, it's really working. How do you think they should go about proving it, that this is really valuable?
I think the first step is defining things. I know it looks very repetitive and it looks the simplest thing. Defining things is very valuable because if you have the same definition, then only you can replicate. That is the first thing you can do. So when you define something, you will look into all the parameters properly and then have a proper definition. Now, remember, observation is the first step in science. You have a personal observation and then you have some intuition and then start doing actual research, right? So she's been hackering about these things for what, from the 80s, so it's 30 years and she couldn't even do a proper RCT, right? I think there are one or two here and there. So you need to go step by step. You need to go slowly. And also, even in the review they have published, they have correctly identified that these are all correlations, not
Yeah.
causal relations, right? So if I am there, the first step I will do is whether it is a causal relation or it is just a correlation. So without doing any of these steps, there is no point in doing a reliability study or an RCT. First, do the basics of what am I observing? What do you think is observable? All these things are the first primary steps. I think that is what is the sad part of it.
To those who are wondering that I've seen this kind of abnormal patterns, what they're saying in clinic, I've treated it's working. That what Mr. Hariom is pointing is, of course, the patients are having those abnormal pattern. But what he's pointing is, did the abnormal pattern comes first or the pain came later?
Correct.
In many cases, it is the pain that came first and patients are trying to adapt to. So in those correlations, what he means is that those studies cannot tell what came first. No, the temporality part of the, we can't really distinguish. So we needed actually a longitudinal study where you take people who are having abnormal sustained repetition, whatever it is, and then follow them up for a period of time and see how many of them actually develop the problem. And one would wonder for 30 years or so, such studies with a huge endorsement from a bigger organization should have been possible. And for those who have not looked into the research, similar such studies exist. And the reviews, the result doesn't suggest that this kind of posture doesn't actually eventually result in pain, right? So it does
I can
exist.
give you a simple example. If you have uh, if you get a thorn prick in your heels, right?
Right.
After that, you will raise your heels and probably you will walk 5 steps, sometimes even 10 steps if the pain is there. So we know that sometimes after the pain, you get an abnormal posture. Now we want to know whether this is same in LBA or my analogous is not true in LBA, right? So they have never done that. And also the other thing to look into is the abnormal configurations, what happens after you have a pain or something like that. These are far more complicated patterns rather than just saying that they move towards the least amount of resistance as they have suggested with physics. Physics is true, there is no question about it, but the biological physics is far more complicated to think that it goes towards the least resistance part of it. It's just a joke because we know that there is n number of degrees of freedom. Because there is a number of degrees of freedom, we can't predict what is the least resistance as they have formed.
For this example, I cannot control my temptation to give the example of what Latash has said, that if you go and if you are in a slanting surface, if you go and put a ball on the slanting surface, physics works and the ball will fall, come to the slope, right, the end. But if you go and make a person's stand over there, the person will not come to the, fall on the floor. The biological system controls. This is what he is referring, that physics is fine, toward least resistance, but biological system doesn't work. And Latash puts it the best, best way possible, I guess. Okay, so moving on, the last point we want to discuss. All right, all given, said and done, we still want to know if the treatment really works. So they did tested it. I was able to find only one RCT, even in the recent review written by Sarman, also cited the same RCT. So in that randomized control trial, basically they had two groups. In one group, they have classified patients according to this movement impairment syndrome and treated them according to the movement impairment syndrome. Interestingly, that treatment also had a patient education component to it, which was not coming into that original model, conceptual model, understandable. The other one is without the classification, how usually patients are being treated, giving strengthening stretching exercises. And what did they found out is, let me see if I can get that RCT. Don't know where exactly it was there. Yeah. Just a moment. I had this. Don't know where it was. Yeah, got it. Okay, here is that randomized control trial I was talking about. You can see the screen, right?
We can.
Yeah. So this is the randomized controls trial. As you can see, movement system impairment versus general exercise. And let us look into what they have done. The measurement they had: pain intensity, disability, and global impression. And as you can see, the pain difference between a 0.05 literally means that there was no difference in pain and disability. As simple as, this is what
They also have written that in the last sentence, right?
Yeah. And again, conclusions is where it's usually spin. And they ended up saying that both are having similar effect, right? Basically, it just means that there is a spontaneous recovery might have brought that effect rather than that. Again, it supports our the views that, as Mr. Ariom was pointing, you can predict if a treatment is based upon a flawed a model, or if it is not based upon a contemporary theoretical model, or if it is based upon a theoretical model which is also already found to be not fitting, not really true. This is what you will end up with. That's the fundamentals of science. You predict from theories, right? So it's not surprising, even though the authors tried to give certain reasons for why it went. So the results are also suggesting that it's not really working, right? So I just want to end up with one, I need a clarification, that there is a treatment called kinetic therapy or something like that. I don't know. Is it same?
I think they have the similar. I think they have similar ideas like this. That is, one is short, one is stronger, one is what is the Hollick's advisement? What's the next one? Taller, I suppose. So similar ideas without defining anything. What's the point? From where do I measure? What is the length? What is the two standard deviation?
Right.
I think it all has the same flaws in thinking. you see in 4 or 5 patients and you think that you have found the next Nobel prize-winning idea. And then you start teaching it rather than critically appraising it and going step by step into things.
Right. So let's end this conversation with your final thought.
I think that if we want to become a science-based therapy, which I still think we have a long way to go in physiotherapy, we need to start with basics, like understand what is the definition, understand what's the point, what is standard deviation. If I say that this is lesser or more, if I don't have standard deviation or a mean or things like that, it's slightly difficult to generalize it and make it into science. I know it looks sometimes very vague, but uh, making it science is going to make us better. So we should stop going from, or this is my repetition, stop from going from guru-based or evidence-based to real science-based. That is our step to look forward, not these fancy word people.
Okay, so that's the end of this discussion, and don't forget to subscribe if you like it. Press the like button. Otherwise, that's up to you.